Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I'm keeping virtual company with a friend, USA Today and international best-selling author Alison Gaylin. Alison brings a unique background and perspective to her books. She studied theater and playwriting at Northwestern University and later attended Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. Her writing credits have ranged from performance art critic to supermarket tabloid reporter, and her fascination with celebrity, crime, and communications often, pretty much always, finds its way into her fiction. Alison's novels have won the Shamus Award and the RT Reviewer's Choice Award, and she has been nominated for the Edgar Award 4 times, winning in 2019 in the category of Best Paperback Original for If I Die Tonight. Her 11th novel, Never Look Back, came out last summer and received a starred review from Kirkus, who called it expertly crafted, a mind-bending mystery. Alison's newest, The Gift, is one of 6 shorts featured in the Amazon Original Stories collection Hush, available digitally and on audio July 30th. Here's the elevator pitch. It's dreaded news for actress Lila McCord and her husband Nolan. Their 8-year-old daughter has vanished. To find her, Nolan reaches out to a psychic gifted with uncanny visions about the lost girl, but Lila thinks she sees right through him. Is he a con artist or the real thing? Either way, he might be telling the truth, and that's too frightening for Lila to bear. But not to worry, my friends. Alison Gaylin herself is anything but frightening, at least off the page. She is, however, every bit as entertaining as her books, which you're about to find out for yourselves. Today, I am really happy to be in conversation with USA Today bestselling author Alison Gaylin. Hey, Alison, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, John.
Sure, I'm so excited to have you here. We should tell people that your new short story is The Gift, and it is one of 6 in a new collection from Amazon called Hush. And the cool thing is you can read the stories all together, you can buy them individually, or you can listen to them on audio, and they are really kind of creepy and awesome. And we like creepy and awesome. Maybe that's just us.
Yeah.
But I thought I would start by asking you sort of the obvious. The overriding theme of this collection seems to be either the distortion of truth or the dichotomy between perception and deception. So I was wondering if you could tell us how that served as a jumping off point for your story.
Well, yes, I've always wanted to write about a psychic. Sometimes I think the whole idea of psychics and mediums and everything is, some people believe them, some people don't believe them. They could be lying, they could not be lying. And so I wrote about a psychic and an actor or actress. And the gift refers to both the gift of acting and the gift of, being able to tell the future or be in contact with the dead or whatever. So that's the main sort of crux. Is this psychic lying? What does he know? It takes place in around the area where I live, which is the Hudson Valley. Lila McCord is a world famous actress who's, Oscar-winning actress, and her young daughter goes missing, and her husband gets in contact with a psychic who is in Woodstock and kind of a shady, shifty seeming guy, but he might know more about Lila's daughter and Lila than most people do. It's very hard to describe because there's a really big twist in it, and there are a lot of spoilers, but that's the basic where it comes from as far as its relationship to the truth.
Sure. And I was just thinking, like, if somebody, wrote a book about your life, it would be great, like Alison Gaylin, From Psychics to Psychos, because you've written about them all.
Yes.
But anyway, let me ask you.
Psychic, though.
I know, right? Yeah, I love the psychic twist. Yeah, right? It's great. But I did want to ask you, so you mentioned that your main character is an actress named Lila, and she struck me, as very familiar in the sense that she was a teen star, and she sort of went off the rail, as so many teen stars tend to do, and then legitimizes herself with major motion pictures. And so she sort of has that redemption. But I'm just wondering if, I know that you have a fascination with pop culture and you have for a very long time. Can you talk about, how that sort of inspired her character?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I saw there were so many of these stars who were, big in like the early aughts, and then they just went off the rails. There were the Lindsay Lohans and um, Paris Hilton's, although she was never really an actress, but it's like you get a chance to redeem yourself or you don't. Now, it was much more dramatic in my story because Lila literally not only goes off the rails, she just disappears for a year, and no one knows where she is, not even the love of her life, Nolan, who ends up being her husband. And then she just shows up out of the blue with a baby that she had during this time. And that's her daughter, who winds up going missing in the story. So I always, as you know, I've always been kind of fascinated about writing about actors and Hollywood types. I studied theater in college, but my real connection to it is I've been an entertainment writer for a long time. And, before I was an actual fiction writer, I was writing a different type of fiction for the tabloids. So I've always been just fascinated. I grew up in the Los Angeles area. One of the first books that got me into crime writing, it was Helter Skelter, which I read when I was 10. So I've always been fascinated by Hollywood. It's not just its glamour and it's sort of larger than life aspects, but it's smaller than life aspects, and it's horror and it's dirtiness.
Sure.
So I think with characters like these actresses or other famous people who just become famous too young, when we're all sort of going through figuring out who we are, and then they have everything available to them. And I don't just mean actresses. Obviously there are tons of Robert Downey Jr.'s in this world, and actors as well. There's so much temptation and so much sort of still growing left to do that it's kind of a recipe for disaster. And the human inside the big star kind of maybe takes over, and then what happens? Are they able to redeem themselves, or are they ruined by it forever? So I've always loved that story, and this gave me a chance to kind of write about the after, somebody who did sort of redeem themselves.
I just keep thinking, Miley Cyrus, please be okay. you
Oh
know?
yeah, I think Miley Cyrus is great. She's very talented anyway. So I think she went through it, and now I think she's actually sober right now from the
I
last
think
time.
so. I keep telling my wife, see, she's okay.
Yes.
We saw her when she wasn't so okay, but I mean, what a talent. Anyway, to get back to your story.
Awesome.
But I did want to ask you, you mentioned that Lila is married to Nolan. They met in a TV show that they were both doing when they were teenagers. And they actually, they've married, they've had a child, they have this relationship, which seems to the outside world probably, pretty idyllic. But again, it's that perception of appearances versus reality. So can you talk a little bit about their relationship dynamic and, what is typical and what isn't of a relationship in Hollywood, specifically when, both parents are working actors?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the tendency is to imagine these people as joined at the hip because that's the way we want them to be. We fuse their names. There's Brangelina and there was, Bennifer, and actually none of those couples there's Tomcat, they're not anymore. These people that we fused their names because we want them together so badly. And I think when both of them are working, they see each other so rarely. And I've actually heard this about a lot of Hollywood couples, that it's like they're just like ships passing in the night because they're working on projects all the time, and the kids are getting raised by nannies. I mean, that's not always the case, but it's interesting. I mean, I actually think I always, I'm going to sound like, oh, I'm so obsessed with celebrities that this keeps me up at night, but I am really curious about a lot of these celebrity couples during the pandemic. They're home, they're stuck with each other. They don't just see each other at premieres, Nobody's able to get Botox or anything. So roots are growing out, guts are happening. Like what happens then to these magical couples? But yes, so Lila and Nolan are a Hollywood couple that they call them Lilan and Nola. They like fuse their names, and everybody thinks of them as just this couple. But Lila's main connection and the big true love of her life is her daughter. And when her daughter goes missing, I think there's a line in there about, they have everything, but they're like any couple anywhere who has lost a child. They have nothing. So when her daughter is gone, she is nothing more than a mother who has lost her child, somebody who has lost the love of her life. If Nolan went missing, she would get over it, but not her daughter. So I feel like that's the big true relationship in the book.
I was going to say, a missing child really equalizes you. And, one of the things that I loved about the story is, both parents are working when Fidelity goes missing. So, of course, everybody scrambles home and there has to be somebody to blame. And you just know, that the caretaker is going to get sacked, even though, she wasn't even directly involved. The kid was at school. But, you're out just waiting for it.
Yes. Lila's furious and poor Courtney, the nanny, who's just sitting there like, what did I didn't do? I was just trying to call you. So, yes. And when her daughter goes missing, Lila's at the premiere of her movie that she's expected to win another Oscar for in London. So she has to fly back. And Nolan is shooting a Netflix movie in the middle of the desert. So neither one of them is there when this little girl goes missing.
Right.
So interesting.
Sure. Yeah, no, very much so. And I wanted to ask you, too, you're obviously, a mother yourself, though your daughter's a bit older now. But I'm just wondering, can you talk about how you are able to draw upon, the fears of a mother or a parent, the vulnerabilities that come along with that, and sort of tap into those emotions? Because I think that obviously, that's a main thrust in this story.
Yeah, I've always written about what scares me the most. And when I first started publishing books, actually my first book was published when, my daughter was 3 or 4 years old. She's 19 now. But when I was first writing books, I wasn't a mother yet. And I was just sort of like, kind of thinking about the things that scared me. Oh, serial killers, that scares me. So I'll write about that, people not knowing your boyfriend as well as you think you do, I'll write about that. But when you have a child, your biggest fear involves not knowing that child as well as you think you do, not being able to protect that child, as in the story, that child disappearing. So as a mother, it's really easy for me to draw on that, and it fascinates me, and that's why I feel that I'm able to write about it. What interests me are writers like Dennis Lehane, who wrote Mystic River before he had a child, and the emotions just ring so true. So I really admire somebody who's able to do that. I mean, I think it's easy when you're a parent to write about how somebody would feel if something happened to their child, because that's on your mind all the time, I guess if you're a neurotic parent like me, maybe.
No, it's completely normal, but it must be nice to have a way to channel, those insecurities.
Yes, exactly.
I'm just wondering, do you find that it's easier with a little bit of time and distance now that your daughter is older? Like, I know that some people fear writing about those things and that it might, make it reality. And then on the other hand of that, I know your good friend, Wendy Corsi Staub, she always says, she will write things in a book because she thinks if she writes them in a book, they'll never happen in real life. So where do you fall in that?
That's a good point of Wendy's. That's good.
No wonder she's written 90 books.
Yeah, exactly. So nothing bad's ever going to happen to Wendy. Not going to cross I feel like most of when I write about people with children in my books and things happening to them, the children tend to be a little bit younger than my child. So I'm like, okay, got past that. Now I can look back on it and write about that a little bit,
Sure.
when I wrote If I Die Tonight, that was actually based on a story that really happened in Rhinebeck, and I heard about it through my daughter, she was only 13 at the time when the story happened. It was a hit and run.
Right.
Two high school students, two boys, that got conflated into something that it really wasn't. And that interested me so much, I decided to write about it. But I tend not to write about children that are the exact same age as my child is right now. That said, I can't help but sometimes the kids have some similarities to my own child, just because I want them to feel real, and that's,
Sure.
my daughter and her friends are the people that I've always known. So yeah, so I think, maybe when she's 40, I'll write about a 19-year-old parent having a problem with her 19-year-old.
So much to look forward to.
Exactly.
All right, so I'm going to ask you one more question that's sort of related to this story, and then maybe we'll move out a little bit more broadly if that's okay with you.
Of course.
But I did want to ask, you mentioned that you grew up in and around Los Angeles and you live in the Woodstock area now, and that is the setting for this book. And again, appearances versus reality, Hollywood is sort of one kind of lifestyle, though there is certainly a different look to Hollywood, and people who've never been there, if you touch down, you'll be very surprised if you
Right.
step away from the theater. And then Woodstock is kind of a much more quaint life. So can you just talk about the dichotomy of that and why you chose to, draw on where you live right now for this story and for where they make their family home?
Well, okay, so I was thinking that it would be easier for a child to go missing in an area like mine, where they're not, paparazzi following them all the time. So that was, just on a practical level, that's what I decided to do. But there are a lot of celebrities that sort of escape to, my area, and people who have second homes up here and use it to sort of get away from it all. And so there you used to see, like when Marissa was a baby, Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke lived here, and you would see them just in the park with their children, and it was like kind of sweet because they could live a semi-normal life, as opposed to somewhere like the Hamptons, where a lot of celebrities have their second homes and their paparazzis there. So I wanted to write about this sort of, this Hollywood couple and they are true like fish out of water when they're in, my area. So and I know this area quite well. So that was my thinking behind it. Also, the idea of sort of a storefront psychic in Woodstock is an entirely different thing than a storefront psychic in Hollywood or New York City or something like that. It's a different type of person, possibly a little more spiritual, so that was where my thinking came from. And I just sort of, I like the kind of dichotomy between those two worlds.
Sure. Awesome. And so to move away from that a little bit, I did want to ask you too, because in addition to short stories, you've written many novels now. So how do you find the process of writing something short to compare to something longer, especially, given your background in journalism? I mean, you really have to get to the point. But how do those compare? How are they different? And do you have a preference between, how long your writing is?
Well, it's interesting, like, my husband used to be a screenwriter. He's, he has a video production company, and, screenwriting was like more of a long form thing, but he's also a great cook, and he loved to cook. And what he always would say about cooking was like, he could just prepare this meal and it's like instant satisfaction, instant gratification. And it's not quite to that degree with a short story, but it's a lot faster gratification than writing a novel. When I'm writing a novel, I feel like I have to be a little bit more careful with my characters. I have a tendency to go dark, and I'm one of those people that people read my books and like, I didn't like that. I found that character unlikable, which I don't really mind that much as long as they're compelling.
Sure.
In a short story, I can really just go for it and make a character, as long as they're interesting. I can make them very dark, I can make them very guilty and very unlikable. I don't always do that, but you can have sort of a more dramatic thing happen when you're writing a short story. So I really enjoy both mediums. I like, stretching out a story and writing a slow burn and making things grow and kind of living in that world for 9 months or to a year while I'm writing the novel. But I also like the more instant gratification of writing something in a few days, and then
Sure.
it's fun. So.
Well, that makes perfect sense. It probably gives you a little sanity back when you don't have to spend a year with the project hoping that it's going to work.
Yes.
But you had mentioned too, and I think this is really cool. So you were a theater major at Northwestern before you came to journalism. So can you talk a little bit about, how you're able to draw on that experience in your writing? I mean, I'm wondering character development, dialogue, action. I'm assuming all those things are sort of transferable.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in creating characters. I feel a lot the way I did when I was acting or studying acting. It's almost like directing in a way, because you're envisioning where everybody is in your mind, and you're sort of creating the scene and you're directing them in different ways. And then you're kind of getting underneath their skin and kind of exploring motivations, which is exactly what you do when you're acting. Of course, it's somebody else's character that you're trying to get to know, but I find it really a lot more similar than you would think. And then also, by the time I graduated from Northwestern, I was in the playwriting program there, and I was studying writing plays. And so as a result, dialogue and dialogue scenes for me are a lot. They're like I have the most fun writing them, because to me, dialogue always tells you more about who is saying it than what's being said, and and how they feel about each other in a scene, and what their motivations are, much more than any information you're getting across. If you just have information, I would just paraphrase a scene.
Sure.
So playwriting sort of kind of taught me that. And then, yeah, acting, creating characters, that's what you're doing when you're writing a novel, only kind of the sky's the limit. It's like, I'm not too short to be a character that I'm writing in a
Sure.
novel, or I'm not the wrong age, or whatever. I can make anybody. So it kind of satisfies that acting urge as well.
Sure. And so then, you sort of jumped into journalism and you studied that at Columbia. And, that's sort of a more, I guess, practical career path where you think maybe you can actually make a living.
Yes,
Um,
that's
and,
it.
you said yourself that you did some tabloid journalism and that was sort of writing its own kind of fiction.
Yes.
Credit that to you. But, so can you talk a little about the difference between writing fact-based fiction and true fiction, and what lends itself from that journalistic background to writing novels versus the difficulty of, something based in reality versus something that's just based in your imagination?
Yes. Okay. So when I went to Columbia, it was funny because I'd already worked for the Star. That's like, I was one of two reporters for the Star magazine,
Right.
to go to Columbia Graduate School of Journalism that year, which was just, I don't know if that was a first or an ever or what, but it was just weird. They're like, let's get some tabloid reporters in here. So yeah, and that was like one of my first jobs out of college, was working for the tabloid. And I think all journalism, to a degree, you try to be as objective as possible, but everything has an opinion to it, and it's much stronger when you're writing for a tabloid. You figure out who's the good guy and the bad guy in your story, and you kind of write from that point of view. That said, I feel like what I've learned from studying journalism that has helped me as a fiction writer has more to do with not being too precious about my words, particularly on the first draft, not battling too much with editors, and making deadlines, just like practical things like that, not having too much of an ego. Because, my very, very first job, when I got out of college, out of acting, my idea was I was going to get a job in development, working for movies. But at the time, there was a big screenwriters strike going on, so there were no jobs to be had. So I started, before I wrote, like a few months before I started writing for got a job at the Star, I was doing like theater reviews for newspapers. And my first one was for the Pasadena Star News, and I was reviewing plays. And I remember writing my first review, and my editor just looked at it and she was like, "This is terrible. This is such bad writing. It's awful." And I'm just like standing there, and you get used to that. You get a thick skin. So I don't think I mind like the bad Goodreads review as much as a lot of other writers might, or get so sensitive about things. I'm not inviting people to give me bad reviews, but I'm, you as a journalist too, journalists are just trashed all the time, and people call in and say, "I never said that," and if you don't have them on tape, you're in trouble. And or you painted my words differently than the way I said them. And you have to have a thick skin, and you have to have that roll off your back, and you have to realize that that nobody likes everything that you write. That's actually physically impossible unless you're writing instructions to instructions on a package.
Yeah.
So everybody's going to have an opinion about your writing, and so I think the thick skin and the discipline and the ability to kind of know that you can rewrite, and know that that it might not come out perfect the first time, but that's okay. That's all from journalism.
Yeah, that's great. And I know, I've read some advice that you've given to other, aspiring writers. And I think it's great how you take your background and you're able to draw, the very practical things from journalism, but also, the idea that if you're writing a story or a novel, there is, editing and rewriting, and you do get a take two, unlike, real live stage theater. I mean, nobody's going to call cut in the middle of a production.
Yes,
really,
exactly.
Really bad,
I mean, I'm in the process of revising a book right now, and I've got, my editorial letter, and I'm just so grateful for all, for my editor reading it that carefully, and for her helping me to make it a better book. I think that's all good. That's not,
I know you want, if your book is your baby, you want it to be the cutest, most well-bred baby it could be. And I'm sure your editor, she probably really appreciates, having authors who can take the feedback, as it was intended, versus the people who aren't able to do that.
Yep.
But so let me ask you too. So you went from, journalism to fiction. So what inspired that leap, other than the fact that in fiction there's less likelihood of a lawsuit?
Well, that was it. No, I've always, like, my passion ever since I was, in the playwriting program. But before that, before I ever even became interested in acting, I wanted to write fiction. I wanted to write short stories and books, and I used to write short stories as a kid all the time. And then, of course, I had that teacher in high school who gave me the B in English, and I said, why did I get a B? I was always an A student in English, and she said, I only give Bs to people who will one day write professionally. And so that discouraged me for a long time, but it was always there. And it was like, even when I was in acting, when I was studying acting at Northwestern, my acting teacher commented on my journals that I wrote, my acting journals, and said how good the writing was. And, so as an actress, I was a really good writer. So, yeah, I don't think I was ever that great as it, but anyway, so it was always there. So when I was in New York City after I graduated from Columbia, and I was working, at various like magazines and getting jobs, I started taking a fiction writing workshop, and with a woman named Abigail Thomas, who's a great writer. She's a memoirist, actually, but she wrote Three Dog Life, a lot of other books. But at the time, I think it was before she even published her first book, and she was teaching this fiction writing workshop, and that was like the highlight of my whole week. And it was there that I wrote this short story that eventually became a novel, that eventually became a completely rewritten novel that was Hide Your Eyes, which was my first book. So that's where that came from.
Sure. And that I think reassures a lot of people who think that the work has to be perfect the first time. And then it probably terrifies the people who think it's going to be a one and done, because that just doesn't happen. It shouldn't happen.
No, you can't think about any of that. You just have to think about wanting to tell a good story, and it's like that's the way I still think about things. It's like if I'm writing, I'm tortured and I'm miserable, but I'm happier than I am if I wasn't writing, and I want to tell a good story. I don't, I can't think like, oh, I'm never going to get another publishing contract after this, or or this is going to, then you just get completely paralyzed. You can't.
Great. No, that's very good practical advice. So I have to ask you too, because I feel like I should have known this about you, and I don't know if I did and forgot, or if I just didn't know this about you. But you did your master's thesis on murderously obsessed fans, and I
Yeah.
know that you were able to draw upon that for one of your more recent novels. So can you just talk about that briefly, because I find that a very fascinating topic, and I think a lot of people do, because it's something you see very often on true crime TV, podcasts. It's
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, it was like when I was working when I was back in LA before I went to graduate school, this whole Rebecca Schaefer murder happened with this obsessed fan who, um, of course, before that there was John Lennon. There was always, but this guy Robert Bardo was able to track down this young actress who was on a TV show, and just walked right up to her door and shot her. And he tracked her down through her driver's license records, and as a result, there were these stalker laws that were enacted. But it was a huge news story then. And interestingly enough, the prosecutor who made it possible for those stalker laws to be enacted and was a huge hero was Marcia Clark, and that was before OJ. So
right.
anyway, I've always been interested in, obviously, not just the whole idea of celebrity, but of these people who um, expect more out of a celebrity than just entertaining them out of a screen, and viewing that screen to to viewer relationship as reciprocal.
Right.
And so so I wrote my master's thesis on obsessed fans, and I spoke to clinical psychiatrists. I even spoke to one obsessed fan on the phone. I don't even know how I got connected with him. It was through, I was doing like an investigative thing of tracking this guy down. It was just very weird, but I did speak to him on the phone, and he was talking to me about Tiffany the pop star and samurai swords and all kinds of things, and it was strange. But there is this idea, and the anger and the rage of the obsessed fans comes from the person on this screen, the relationship not being reciprocal, and them discovering that, or discovering that this person was human, or that you disagree with them on something, or so so yeah, it seems like the ultimate dangerous relationship to me. And that was sort of like, when I was started writing, that's always kind of what I wanted to do, was an obsessed fan story. I wrote a short story about an obsessed, literally an obsessed fan, but is it reciprocal or isn't, called Cherish. That was in an anthology years ago that Megan Abbott edited, called Hell of a Woman. But yeah, so yeah, I can't, it's funny, I was trying to think about anything, because I was thinking about The Gift and how it's about celebrities, and I was thinking about anything that I've written that's not about celebrities, like at least tangentially, and I couldn't think of anything. I mean, If I Die Tonight is like, that's a domestic, thriller, but there's a has-been 80s pop star in it too. I have got to always do something, I guess.
No, it's so interesting though. And when you were talking, I'm thinking about, again, appearances versus reality, and how we all assume from the outside that these celebrities live these very charmed lives. But, not only do they have to deal with the constant glare of the spotlight, but also people thinking that they've made these connections, and then you do have to worry about stalkers. And so there's definitely a downside. I mean, we see the money and the glitz and the fame, but there's a completely, different side to that. And
Yeah.
I do want to ask you too, because we do love murder and mayhem in pop culture, but so much of it is rooted, sadly, in reality. And I know that in your books, obviously that's present, but on the other hand, there's an exploration of what the impact of crime is on the people who've suffered through it and their families and friends. So can you talk about sort of balancing the entertainment value with the actual reality of it?
Yeah, I think it goes hand in hand actually. Like I think the the entertainment or the escapism value of like crime fiction or the type of crime fiction I like isn't like a light escape. It's like sort of looking under a rock that you shouldn't be looking under, and yet it's still safe. So it's a lot of it is the fear. And in order to make it that fear more visceral, you have to make it as real as possible. I think it comes from that. I love reading true crime because, I like the type of true crime where the victims are respected and where they come to life as real people. And it breaks your heart when you read it. It's like reading a tragedy, Shakespearean tragedy or something. The the you know the reality of it really hits home. And so that's what I try to do in the fiction that I write, is to, even if I'm writing about has been 80s pop stars, or Hollywood murders, I try to make the people and their emotions as universal and real as possible. So no matter who they are, they're feeling fear and grief and jealousy and shame, and all the types of emotions that are just real, that everybody feels.
Sure.
So does that make sense?
Yeah,
I
and I think it
think
really
I
resonates in your fiction, and I think that's why I, enjoy it so much. And to your point, I think it's true too. When you read a true crime book or story that's been done well, I mean, first, I think you're fascinated by the fact that yes, this happened, but then it's more emotionally resonant because you realize it happened, but it happened to a person or people, and that really impacts you. But anyway, I do want to let you go, but I can't let you go before I ask you, because people always want to know, now that you have this wonderful short story, The Gift, coming out, what are you working on next? Because if memory serves, you are about due for a novel sometime relatively soon, and I would
oh
love if you could give us a
yes.
little teaser.
Well, I actually just I'm working on revisions on a novel right now that's going to be coming out at the end of May of next year. And the working title of it, which I think is probably going to be the regular title, although don't, if it
You know
turns
how
out
that
to be
goes.
something different, don't blame me, is The Collective.
Oh,
And it's different than a lot of books I've ever written, in that it's one point of view, and first person present tense, and it's kind of a thriller, and um, it's about the rage of mothers whose children were taken from them, and the person who took them was never punished in the way they should have been. That's basically that's a weird elevator pitch, but that's basically what it
it's intriguing. I was going to say, but now you have, to hold people over.
is.
We have The Gift. You have to read it very, very slowly if you're waiting for Allison's next book. But
Read it so slowly. Read it like 20 times in a row.
that's
Just keep
right.
rereading it.
And the nice thing is there are other stories in this collection as well, so you can also read those. Uh,
Wonderful stories.
but yeah, they're terrific. It's a really great collection. I have to say, I'm weary of short story collections, because when they work, they really work well, and when they don't work at all.
Yeah.
But Hush is fantastic, and I mean, it's such a high caliber of talent, but every story is phenomenal. And there's that interweaving theme of truth and distortion, but none of the stories are repetitive of one another, which is fabulous.
Yes, it's true. I'm very impressed with the editors on that. So yes.
Yeah, they did a nice job, but your story is certainly a standout, definitely for me.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
you're welcome. So thank you so much for doing the show, Allison. Really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll catch up with you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John. This was really fun.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.